can't just say, I accept Jesus and thank you for your forgiveness. You then must not walk in the flesh. You need victory. Is that clear? Yes. If you're abiding in him, you're not walking in the flesh. Okay, now let's talk about the fruit of the Spirit. And we have sections on these later. But the fruit of the Spirit is love. It's the antithesis of all these other things we've talked about. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. Now, when it said earlier that if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law, have you ever heard that misapplied? So somebody thinks, well, once you accept Jesus and he gives you his Spirit, you don't have to obey the law anymore. That's not what he's saying. He's saying if you have the fruits of the Spirit, that always involves obeying the law, and there is no law against these things. In other words, obviously there's no law against love, joy, peace. And those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh. So if a person thinks you can still live in the flesh and be saved, no, those who are Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Is crucifixion ever easy or painless? Is it sometimes hard to crucify the desires of the flesh and that lower nature? We got a whole section here talking about the flesh and the Spirit. With its passions and desires. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. The two need to go together. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. That's verse 26. Okay, we've read that all. Now, before I run along, just while it's fresh in my mind, in Galatians chapter 5, verse 16 to 26, Paul uses 5 key verbs that describe what this walk looks like, to what the Spirit reigning in the life looks like. He says, walk in the Spirit. And the Greek there means to walk around or to follow. It's like the disciples of Aristotle. They were pedestrians. They followed him around wherever he went. It was a way of life. And so that's one of the phrases that's used. He's not talking about the occasional walk, but a daily experience. The second verb is to be led, and that's in verse 18. This suggests that we need to allow the Spirit to lead us. It's one thing to follow someone. It's another thing to be led. And so that you know where you're going. Our job is to follow. And the next verb is to live in the Spirit. Paul here is referring to the new birth experience that daily must mark the life of every believer. So it's not just where you go, it's something happening on the inside, that you're living in the Spirit. And then he uses the word to walk again, and that word walk is more like the Greek word for march. That means to be in formation, to have a life of order, one of discipline, like a soldier. All this is in here. And then he says, of course, part of that walk is a walk to the cross. It's that death march, that final walk, that self-surrender, to be crucified. Now, I know this is a little shocking, but that's what it means. If you make that decision to follow Jesus, that it's a denial of self, and you really don't live until you first die. You can't be born again until you bury and crucify that old man. So that's something about what that walk means in those verses. Now, we're under the section now, do not love the world.